Well, I'd say we've made progress in some important areas over the last couple of decades. We have the highest graduation rate from high school we've ever had as a country. Over the last 8 years, we had 1 million more African American and Latino students go on to college. So there are signs of progress. That said, I'm very worried about the current moment. I think there's a lack of a clear vision from the current administration, the Trump administration, about what direction education should head. And to the extent that they have articulated a vision, I think it's actually counter to the interests of low-income students and students of color. A dismantling of federal protection of civil rights, backing away from the federal commitment to provide aid for students to go to higher education, an undermining of the public commitment to public schools. I'd sort of distinguish between different types of school choice. So vast majority of kids are in traditional district public schools. We've got to make sure that we're doing everything we can to strengthen those schools and ensure their success. Then I think there is an important role that high-quality public charters can play if there's rigorous oversight. And if you think about a state like Massachusetts or New York, there's a high bar to get a charter, there's rigorous supervision of the academics and the operations of the schools, and a willingness to close schools that are low performing. So for me, those high quality public charters can contribute as a sort of laboratory for innovation and work in partnership with the broader traditional system. But then there's something very different going on in a place like Michigan, where you've got really proliferation of low-quality for-profit charters run by for-profit companies. They're poorly regulated. Schools are allowed to continue operating. They're doing a terrible job. They're taking advantage of students and families. That's not what we need, and my view is that states that have those kinds of weak charter laws need to change them and move towards something more like Massachusetts, where there's a high bar and meaningful accountability for charters. And then there's a whole other category of vouchers, which is using public money for students to go to private school. And to my mind, that is a mistake. We ought to have public dollars going to public schools with public accountability. That could be district schools or charter schools. I started out as a high school social studies teacher, and I've thought a lot about this question of kind of what's the right evaluation mechanism. I think the key thing is you want, as a teacher, to get feedback on how you're doing and what's happening in your classroom. And too often, teaching can feel very isolating, where it's just you and the students. So it's important to have systems in place where a mentor teacher, a master teacher, a principal, department chair is in the classroom observing and giving feedback to teachers, and it's sort of in continuous conversation about how to improve teaching. That should be a part of an evaluation system, but so too should be how students are doing, whether or not students are making progress. And I know folks worry that that could be reduced to just looking at test scores. I think that would be a mistake, but we ought to ask, are students making progress in 7th grade math, if you're a 7th grade math teacher, when we're trying to figure out how you're doing. Now we ought to, as we look at that, we have to take into consideration the skills the students brought with them to the classroom, the challenges they face outside of the classroom. But I think what you see in schools that are succeeding is that they have a thoughtful, multiple measures approach to giving teachers feedback on how they're doing, and see it really as a tool for continuous improvement to ensure that everybody is constantly learning. One of the highest return investments we know we can make as a country is in early learning. We know, for example, that high-quality pre-K can have an 8-to-1, 9-to-1 return on investment. President Obama actually proposed something called Preschool for All, which would have gotten us towards universal access to quality pre-K for low- and middle-income 4-year-olds. That's something we ought to do, because if we can give kids a good foundation, that puts them in a better place to succeed in K through 12 and to go on to college. But I have a long list of policy changes I would want to make. I think fundamentally we haven't made the commitment as a country, the federal level, state level, or local level, to ensuring equitable opportunity for low-income students and students of color. And if we made that commitment, then there's a series of policy changes that would flow from that.